We speak to the God, the goddess, the spirit of life, the eternal. We speak to the mysterious thread that connects us one to the other into the universe. We speak to the deep wisdom at the center of all things, at the center of our beings. We embody the yearning of all people to touch each other more deeply, to hear each other more keenly, to see each other's joys and sorrows as our own, and know that we're not alone. Out of our yearning, we have come to this religious community. May we help each other to proclaim the possibilities that we see, to create the community we desire, to worship what is worthy in our lives, to teach the truth as we know it, and to serve with justice in all the ways we can. Come, let's worship together. I now invite Bob Hughes to come forward and light our chalice for us. And our part is the bold on your order of service.
Let this flag be to us a symbol of...
Do you need a program, Bob?
Yeah, please.
What, you don't have it memorized?
I should have it memorized.
I don't have it memorized. And here's the microphone. Here you go, Bob. You're welcome.
Let this flag be to us a symbol of the wholeness we seek. Its glow reminding us of the sacred bonds that link us to all living things.
Its radiance calling us to cast the light of freedom, justice, and peace upon all the world. Thank you. And trust me, Bob, after 18 years, I don't have it memorized either. So good morning. Whoever you are, wherever you are on your spiritual journey, for this 1 hour, you're part of this community of faith, and you are welcome. And we welcome our friends on Zoom as well. So speaking of welcome, I want to say a big hello to the fellow who's sharing the pulpit up here with me, Representative Josh Cutler. Thanks so much for being here today, Josh. Josh has written, what is this, your fourth book? Second. Oh, it feels like four. Josh has written 2 books. But this book here is so interesting to us as Unitarian Universalists. It's about one of our she heroes, so we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But as we begin our time today, I invite us to welcome one another in the traditional way that we've been doing for the last several years. So let's take a few moments to say hi. You can get up, move around, can't touch one another, but let's raise up the energy in the room, and I'm going to go down and say hi to the folks on Zoom. Hey, Bob. Oh, here it is. Hi there. Hi there, Zoom people. Actually, Dustin, can you unmute the Zoom folks? Thank you. So you can all say hello to one another. It's good to see you all. Hope everybody had a nice Thanksgiving. There we go. So you can say hi to one another on Zoom. Good to see you.
Good morning, everyone.
Good to see you all.
Good morning.
Hi,
You
everybody.
still have to unmute yourself on your computer.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
So good to see you. Hi, Marguerite.
Hi there, Mary.
Hello, everybody.
Marguerite.
Nancy.
Hi, everyone.
Hi,
Hello,
Mary.
everyone.
Hi, Mary Ann.
How are you?
Good.
Hi, Marianne.
Good. Cindy, it's good to see you.
All righty, we'll start making our way back to our seats. And we will mute the Zoom folks. Dustin, thank you so much. I figure by the end of the church year, we'll have this hybrid worship thing down pat. This is kind of complicated. Anyway, lots of exciting things going on at First Parish in spite of the fact that we are still in this pandemic mode. A couple of things I want to announce. First of all, I want to say thank you to Marjorie Hanlon for the flowers for this month. This is another of Marjorie's offerings, and they really have been beautiful. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. I want to remind us all that next Sunday we will have our mitten tree. That's a tradition here in First Parish, a long tradition. So if you are coming into church for the Sunday service, you're invited to bring mittens or hats, and they will go to the Plymouth Coalition for the Homeless. If you're on Zoom, you are invited to come by the church sometime that next week and leave hat and mittens. There's a gray box outside the back door of the church. That will be our recipient place for hats and mittens for the Plymouth Coalition for the Homeless. So we're continuing our mitten tree tradition in a hybrid way. Let's see. Next Sunday also, I will be sharing the pulpit with Reverend Rob Kinslow, who will be your sabbatical minister. I hope you know by now that I'm going on sabbatical as of January 1st. I will return, as I have done on my other two sabbaticals. My first appearance will be on Easter Sunday morning at the sunrise service, kind of like Jesus resurrecting from the ocean. So Rob will be with you. Easter this year is on April 17th. He will be with you January, February, March, and the first part of April. He will be preaching 3 times a month. And if you look at the sabbatical brochure, which was attached to your bell ringer, it outlines all the worship services, and we'll be getting out that brochure as well with the weekly distributions, and it talks about what I'll be doing on my sabbatical. Although, as of Thanksgiving, we saw Carolyn, our daughter in Australia, and I said, I'm going to be coming to visit you guys, and that was Thursday, and now apparently this morning Australia has the newest variant, so I'm not sure that I'll get to see Sister Carolyn. But so my sabbatical is a little bit up in the air, but I'm sure it'll all work out fine. Anyway, Rob will be here, and our young people will join us for the first part of the service. Rob is among other things, he's a seminarian, finishing up seminary, second career guy. He's a magician and a musician, so lots to look forward to with his ministry. In a moment, Jim Hamilton, the chair of the holiday fair, will come up and talk about that. 2 more things. Want to let you know that next Sunday is also Share the Plate Sunday for Father Bills. So I think, Bob, are you going to speak on that next Sunday? Yes. So that'll be a Share the Plate Sunday. And finally, from the music end of things, Ed wants you to know that all of the music today is by African-American composers. The theme here is an abolitionist story, and so we have African-American composer of music. So next, I invite Jim Hamilton to come forward and talk about the holiday fair.
So it is next Saturday, and preparations are really just ramping up. This week will be incredible with people at the church doing all kinds of things and preparing stuff for next Saturday. So let me just say quickly, kind of a thank you to all of the people who volunteered to be chairs of the various areas. So the bake table, we have Carol Napelio, and is Regina here? Regina Mortland is the other chair. So both the, actually, Carol, stand up for a moment. Yeah, come on. Thank you so much for doing that. Keep Carol and Regina in mind as you bake. And I'm talking to you out there in Zoom land, particularly you folks. If you can't come in, maybe your pies, your cookies, your cakes, and baked goods can. So we look forward to seeing those. The silent auction, our 2 people are Tracy Wagner, please stand up, and Cindy Ladd-Fiorini. They're organizing that, and they're looking for, thank you very much, they're looking for donations of various kinds of higher value kinds of things. Now, because we're doing a service auction in, Sharon, I don't know, maybe February timeframe, probably not the service kinds of things as much, but items that would be fun to have. And I hear, actually, we're going to get a couple of copies of Josh Cutler's books, or maybe one at least. So that would be great. So thank you, Tracy and Cindy. Mrs. Kringles, Caroline Mitchell, and my dear Amy are the co-chairs on that. So come on, stand up. Amy, thank you so much. Where can people leave their Mrs. Kringle stuff? Like on the bench outside the hall, or is there a box or something like that? Okay, we'll be looking for that. And that's just everything Christmas that you have, fun, neat stuff for the holidays would be wonderful to have there. And Sharon, please stand up. Nebreski is our greens queen. And I see the greens beginning to accumulate outside by the stairs. So donations of greens, those kinds of things would be just wonderful. And if you'd like to volunteer and work with Sharon, talk to her. Jay, please stand up, is our setup breakdown guy. And for any of these areas, the sign-up sheets right now are on the table in the parlor. I'll move them. We're having our coffee hour outside, is that right? Or are we inside today? We're outside. Okay, so we'll be outside in the tent. I'll bring those sign-up sheets out there afterwards. And one last point, because we're moving money around, we need to have people helping on the financial side. And Nancy Langren is our financial person. Please stand up, Nancy. Thank you so much. And so there may be a need for people to help count money, do security, those kinds of things. So keep that in mind if that's your kind of thing. So I think that is it, and I'll leave it at that. But I really feel like things are ramping up now, and I think we're going to have a great fair. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Jim. It's amazing to think that next weekend is the holiday fair already, so the holidays are moving towards us here. Well, this morning we will once again take an offering, as we traditionally did before COVID. So this morning's offering will be given and received to continue the work of this community of faith, and the ushers will go in the back and grab the baskets with the long handles that seem to be working out very well for our offering. So now, my friends, we've come to the time in our shared service for the offering of candles of joy and concern. And I'm actually going to go down on the floor, and Dustin, if you will, if someone on Zoom would like to share a joy or concern, just put your hand up, and we will call on you, we'll spotlight you, and we're going to have those folks share first. And when they're finished sharing, as the Spirit moves you, you're invited to queue up in that aisle over there and come. This is the first time we are using our candles of joy and concern since March of 2020, if you can believe it. Pretty moving. So I'm going to go to the Zoom folks first. So hi, you all on Zoom. If there's anyone who wants to share, Mary Flanagan will call on you.
We want to share the joyous news that we have a brand new grandchild in Hong Kong, Clementine Yang Flanagan.
Clementine, welcome to the world. Congratulations to both of you. That's great news. Great news. Sari, we'll unmute Sari here so that we can hear what you're saying. Oh, we've got to get you unmuted there.
Okay.
There we go.
On a similar vein, I had my youngest grandchild in California got married during COVID, so none of us could come. But she is now expecting, and we're due for a baby in March.
Oh,
I'm
wonderful.
so excited.
Congratulations. So apparently the marriage worked
Yes.
without you all being there. Super.
Yeah.
Congratulations, Sari.
Thank
Anyone
you.
else who wants to share a joy or concern, just put your hand in front of your face so we can tell that we can see everybody on one screen. Is that right, Dustin? Okay. Marguerite, good to see you. We're going to unmute you. Hold on one sec. We will unmute you and hear from you in a moment. There we go. Did we unmute Marguerite, or oh, maybe you have to unmute yourself there, Marguerite. There we go. Good.
I just wanted to say my brother is having a very difficult time, and he's a bit younger than I am, but he has 2 forms of cancer, and he's struggling mightily. So any good wishes his way, I would appreciate, and he would, I know. Thank you.
Absolutely. Marguerite, what is your brother's name?
He goes by Pete, but his first name is Henry.
Pete.
Pete.
We'll hold Pete in our thoughts and prayers. Thank you. Anybody else who has a joy or concern who's on Zoom who wants to share? All right. Looks like we have all those. So now, folks here in church, if you would have a joy or concern that you want to share, a spoken joy or concern, you'll queue up in that aisle over there. If we can remember how to do this is how we do this. We haven't done this since March of 2020. Pretty exciting. So you're going to just light your candle from here, and you're going to put it in here. And I will begin with a joy, a deep joy. As many of you know, I'm moving out of the parsonage so that an Afghan refugee family can move in. And I needed some help when I didn't realize I needed some help to speed up the process. Otherwise, I think I would be roommates with the Afghan refugee family. So a few people said, would you like us to get some folks, 1 or 2 people to help move the boxes that you've packed, put them in the garage because the movers are coming on Friday. And all I can say is a dozen, I don't know, it just felt like dozens and dozens of people were coming. Some of our young people very, very moved by, very, very moved by having you all help me the other day. Thank you. You know who you are, and I really do appreciate it. Thank you. That's a deep joy.
In keeping with the baby theme, my daughter is 40 weeks pregnant, and if she doesn't have the baby today, she's going to be induced tomorrow. So just keep her in your thoughts, as Mr. McFeely used to say on the Mr. Rogers Show, speedy delivery.
A candle of concern for a dear friend from New York City, Chris, who is suffering from a recurrence of the cancer, but has good prognosis, and we promise we'd keep her in our thoughts. Thank you.
We also have a new baby granddaughter, Natalie Miriam Bray, and they're calling her Tolly. This is the Novembers of babies.
Might have something to do with COVID, the quarantine period. Let's trace back. Congratulations.
So yes, another baby in the baby parade is Amelia Mary Hamilton. What is it, a week ago Tuesday? Amy and I are grandparents for the first time and are delighted.
Congratulations to everyone. Did you have a baby, Jean?
So this is a candle of both joy and concern. Our youngest, Louis, and his family are moving to Sweden for good. So we will have to start visiting Sweden.
Another baby. October 21st, our niece Kaylee and her husband Cameron had a baby girl, Ember Lavinia McFarland.
We are so personally populating the world here. This is fabulous.
Prolific UUs. This is a candle of love and caring for my sister Debbie, who is battling with cancer. And also a candle of joy for friendships that abound around me. It's just wonderful, wonderful.
We keep Debbie in our thoughts and prayers.
No twins. I light two candles, one for my brother David, who just got diagnosed with COVID. He's a couple years younger than me, seems to be doing okay. And the second is thoughts and prayers for good friend Dan Hall and his wife Lori. Dan passed away on the 22nd, and he was 92. He was just a good friend and a great guy.
And this final candle burns for joys and sorrows, deeply felt but not yet spoken. So I'm going to offer the first reading here. And I want to do a little bit of setup for what Josh is going to talk about today. My spiritual friends, as you know, Unitarian Universalism is a non-creedal religion. We don't share one doctrinal creed. What we do hold in common are certain values expressed in both our 7 principles and our 6 sources. And today we look at our UU faith through the lens of our second source, and I will quote it for you. Words and deeds of prophetic people which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. That is our second source. And the person who exemplifies the best of our second source is the woman we're going to talk about today, Maria Weston Chapman. So again, to set the stage for what Josh is going to talk about in Maria Chapman's life, I want to put it in context, a little bit more context. Maria and her husband, Henry Grafton Chapman, were members of Federal Street Church, which is now called First Church in Boston. And at the time that she was a parishioner, the famous William Ellery Channing was her minister. So let's back up a little bit and talk about why William Ellery Channing was so famous. We'll look at a little UU history, and you'll remember our Pilgrim ancestors, the folks who actually gathered this congregation, this community in 1632. Well, theologically, they were Calvinists. And our Calvinist cousins back then believed that all people were depraved sinners, most of them doomed to eternal damnation, and only a few select, elect folks would be saved by proclaiming their love for Jesus Christ. After the Revolutionary War, in the early days of the Republic, there was this new spirit of empowerment and confidence, and a feeling that maybe human beings were actually more than the depraved worms that Calvin used to talk about. In America, there was this growing sense of the dignity, not the depravity, of human nature, and there was a high regard for human reason. Many Calvinist congregations began, like this one, to call ministers who quietly rejected the strict theological views of their forebears, and these more liberal ministers began to preach a more hopeful gospel, one that actually omitted the notion of an original sin. And they also began to start to speak of God as one, not three. So this is a very pivotal date in UU history. In 1819, a minister from Boston was invited to preach an ordination sermon in Baltimore. And back then, ordination sermons could be very pivotal. They were always reprinted, and they often made a little shift in theology. And the minister was William Ellery Channing, and he preached what is now known as the Baltimore Sermon. And in that sermon, he first named Unitarian Christianity, moving away from the Trinity of God to the concept of one God. And although this liberal form of Christianity was still biblically based, Channing said this, and I quote, "God has given us a rational nature and will call us to account for it." So here was this invitation to apply our own reason in our religious life. This was a real shift from Calvinism. Channing's Baltimore sermon was almost as much about the doctrine of human nature as it was about the doctrine of God. His sermon really displayed a very optimistic view of human nature. So this is the context. That his sermon was in 1819, but the Unitarian tradition was really becoming much more progressive, and this is the context in which Josh's story is set. Josh's story is set in 1835, when the English abolitionist George Thompson was touring New England, arousing the anger of those whose livelihood depended upon the cotton industry, even here in New England. Thompson was thought to be planning to attend the Boston Female Anti-Slavery Association. You'll hear more about that. Maria Chapman was their clerk. And Josh is going to talk about the angry mob that converged on one of the buildings of where the publication of the Liberator was made. He's going to tell you the story, but I want to talk a little bit about Maria, and years later, after the incident that Josh is going to speak about, she wrote about it. She wrote this, for example: "The members of Dr. Channing's congregation were the mob. No doubt the mob included others besides Unitarians, but influential members of Federal Street Church were unsympathetic with the Chapmans and the Westons. Channing himself was only moderately supportive of the anti-slavery movement. And though he denied the right of property in slaves and had, Maria wrote, benevolent intentions, he showed, and this is a quote from Maria, neither insight nor courage nor firmness. He opposed immediate emancipation and deplored the formation of anti-slavery associations. She added, Channing, and this is a quote, depreciated the admission of the colored race to our ranks. And about her own minister's opposition to the anti-slavery associations, she simply responded in this way. You know, I never did consider Reverend Channing as an authority. So that's pretty startling because, as I say, he was one of the great ones in our UU history. So I want to also quote a little bit from two places in Josh's book. Let's see. As I said, Maria Chapman, there was going to be this meeting of the Female Anti-Slavery Society on whose board she now served as corresponding secretary. And the meeting was scheduled to be held in Congress Hall on Wednesday, October 14th, the second anniversary of the Society's founding. So Chapman and her sisters worked to spread the news in area churches that Thompson was to be the featured guest, and ladies are invited to attend. And this was big, believe it or not, back then. Maria Chapman's sister asked one friend to take the meeting notice and have it read at the church, and he agreed, but she was dubious about and wondered whether that he really did follow through. The notice was read after Sunday services at the Unitarian Church on Federal Street, the Channing Church, and it quickly drew condemnation from the anti-abolitionist press. This is what some of the anti-abolitionist press said about this upcoming meeting with Thompson. It is truly surprising that Thompson should find silly women to listen to his sweeping abuse of the people of this country. So you can see where the role of women was at the time. And another quote from the press, has it come to this, that the women of our country, I love this part, not content with their proper sphere, the domestic fireside, must have public meetings to encourage a foreign emissary to destroy our peace? And here's another one. Are there not sufficient deluded men already engaged in the work of abolition that the interference of females may be dispensed with? And others expressed surprise that women were moving forward with the lecture despite the rising tide of public opinion against Thompson. And here's another quote. We really had supposed that Thompson and his friends had experienced sufficient opposition to prevent his persevering in attempts to disturb the peace of our community. But it would seem from the above notice that he and they are incorrigible. So, 2 days after the church service was announced, Maria Chapman was visited by Thompson and William Lloyd Garrison with some bad news. The manager of Congress Hall had written a letter denying the women the use of their building for their annual meeting. So this is a little bit of what she was up against in her abolitionist work. And here's one more quote from, I think this is from the epilogue in Josh's book. The 1835 anti-abolitionist mob had been described by many names over the years. The Boston mob, the ruffle shirt mob, the Garrison mob, the broadcloth mob, the gentleman's mob. But he felt it should be known more properly as the Lyman mob. Lyman was the mayor at the time. This is simply calling things by their right name and putting the boot on the right leg, Garrison wrote. Lyman was not the only one in Maria Chapman's crosshairs. She also singled out her former minister, she had left the church by this point, Reverend Channing, a vocal slavery opponent who she felt supported the abolitionists only in words and not deeds, until it was politically convenient and socially accepted to do so. She blamed him for condoning the mob and believed many of the leading gentlemen in the streets back in 1835 actually came from his church. It irked her that Reverend Channing was now held out as an anti-slavery champion. While it may be true that he had spoken out against the Lovejoy murder and later been helpful to the cause in other ways, he had been, and these are her words, timid and vacillating when it really mattered. In her eyes, facts are not always truths, for when they form but a part of the truth, they carry the power of a lie. She wrote in a pointed critique of her former minister. So I think this sets up the context for what Josh is going to talk about and the fundamental story of his book. But it's important for us to realize that not only was this a big, important incident for women, but also something that we ought to think about as we're thinking about the work of William Ellery Channing and the role that he plays in our tradition.
Good morning. Could I ask you to close your eyes for a moment? I want you to think, imagine you're no longer parishioners, the First Parish Unitarian Church in Duxbury. We're now at the Unitarian Church on Federal Street in Boston. It's the fall of 1835. Welcome to open your eyes at any time. Outside the church, horse carriages creak along Federal Street, which is still made of compressed dirt, gas. Street lights remain a novelty. Most streets are still illuminated by oil lamps. Andrew Jackson is our current president. Daniel Webster is a U.S. senator. The mayor of Boston is a man named Theodore Lyman. Boston is dominated by the Whig Party. It's a tense time in the nation. Political unrest, racial division, and mob violence are commonplace. Can we advance to the next slide, please? One of your fellow parishioners is a young woman named Maria Weston Chapman. Her father-in-law is a prosperous ship chandler, and his family pew is probably right down front. Maria comes from more modest means. She grew up in the small town of Weymouth. She's the oldest of 8 siblings. Her father is a sailor turned farmer who struggled with alcohol. Maria had a comfortable upbringing, though certainly not the wealth of some of her distant Duxbury relatives like Ezra Weston, the shipping magnate known as King Caesar. You may not have noticed Maria at first. She had slight features and could come across as quiet and intense. Some even found her cold at first. She was also self-confident, determined, and very bright. One friend praised her morals and intellect, but acknowledged that her charms were not always immediately apparent. Quote, "It takes time to thaw the ice of her exterior. Then you are carried away by the torrent." Maria was now 28 years old. She had recently joined the Women's Anti-Slavery Society in Boston and had quickly become a growing force behind the scenes. Her husband, Henry, was a committed abolitionist before they were married, but Maria held strong anti-slavery views even as a young woman. Next slide. A growing influence was William Lloyd Garrison, the radical publisher of the Liberator newspaper. His paper was first published January 1st of 1831, and Garrison made clear that when it came to speaking out against slavery, he would pull no punches. Quote, he said, "I will be as harsh as truth and as uncompromising as justice. On this subject, I do not wish to think or speak or write with moderation. No, no, I am in earnest. I will not equivocate. I will not excuse. I will not retreat a single inch, and I will be heard." Those were his famous words. You can move the slide. Garrison was a proponent of immediate emancipation of all enslaved persons. Next slide. You see the masthead, the familiar masthead there. Maria believed strongly in immediate emancipation as well, but her progressive views were not widely shared in Boston or even in her relatively progressive church. While most of the city's establishment frowned on the practice of slavery, many still benefited from its practice, whether directly or indirectly. The city's prosperous cotton textile industry in particular relied on cotton cultivated with the labor of enslaved persons in the South. For many, the preservation of the Union was more important than any measured distaste they may have for the institution of slavery. The growing abolitionist movement, and especially the unyielding and uncompromising approach of anti-slavery advocates like William Lloyd Garrison, did not sit well with much of establishment Boston. The issue came to a head in 1835 in the spring. Abolitionists launched a campaign to turn the public opinion against slavery. They flooded the southern states with anti-slavery literature. It became known as the Great Postal Campaign. Unfortunately, the effort backfired and led to violence in the South. As you can see here from this image, this is depicting Charleston, South Carolina, where pro-slavery advocates broke into the post office to steal the mail and burned it. And they burned an effigy of William Lloyd Garrison as well. Next slide. In Boston, city leaders were worried. They called a citywide meeting in August at Faneuil Hall to reject the abolitionist aims and express support for their Southern brethren. The meeting was chaired by Mayor Theodore Lyman. 1,500 of Boston's most respectable citizens attended. They included Mayor Lyman, who's pictured at the left. At right is Harrison Gray Otis, one of Boston's wealthiest and best-known political leaders. It also included Peleg Sprague, a Duxbury native, who had served as a U.S. Senator from Maine and recently resettled in Boston. Organizers of the event tried to frame the event as anti-abolitionist rather than pro-slavery. They hoped the meeting would quell the, quote, poisonous influence of abolitionism in Boston and calm Southern fears. Next slide. Maria Chapman didn't get the message. She and a group of influential women had been meeting regularly to promote the cause of abolition. Their group was known as the Boston Female Anti-Slavery Society. You can see a copy of their constitution here. The Society's annual meeting was supposed to be held in mid-October, but the women could not find a venue to host them. Many local merchants didn't appreciate the women's anti-slavery efforts and objected to any association with them. The owner of one prominent meeting hall forbid the women from meeting there, and just in case there was any doubt, he even took out an ad in the local newspaper to make his position clear. Not a place can be had for love or money, Maria's sister complained. They finally made their arrangements to host their meeting, and Maria helped to spread the word. It was included in the announcements at her Unitarian church on Sunday, but not everybody was happy with that. On the day of the meeting, you advance this slide. On the day of the meeting, October 21st, 1835, this handbill was circulated around the city and in local newspapers. The rumor was that a British abolitionist named George Thompson would be the women's special guest. He was one of the few abolitionists more despised than William Lloyd Garrison. The handbill offered a $100 bounty for Thompson. It was paid for by a group of local Boston businessmen. It did not seem to matter that the handbill was false. Thompson would not be at the women's meeting. He was not even in the city at the time. As Garrison himself would later write, quote, the whole city was now wrought up in a pitch of insanity. Slide. The women held their meeting on Wednesday afternoon on the third floor of a commercial building on Washington Street, right around the corner from the old State House in Boston. It was an unseasonably warm day. The handbill had its intended effect. A crowd gathered outside, quickly grew in size and intensity. The leaders of the mob were men who were among the city's leading residents, bankers, merchants, tradesmen, some militia members. They wore fine broadcloth, camlet coats, casimirs, and beaver hats. Quote, I have kept a hat store for 30 years and never saw so many good hats before in my life, one local hat seller later remarked. This sarcastic cartoon depicts the scene outside of the anti-slavery office, showing the anti-abolitionists dressed in top hats, attacking the sign, and throwing Bibles out the window. Quote, down with the damned abolitionists. The peace of the city is destroyed. Lynch them, it read in mocking tone. Next slide. Inside the lecture hall, the women were still trying to host their meeting. They started with an opening prayer and a scripture reading. The crowd of angry men had filled the hallway and staircase leading up to the room. They yelled and shouted obscenities. Some hurled orange peels at the women. At one point, a floorboard was sent flying into the room, but it landed harmlessly. William Lloyd Garrison was one of the few male guests inside the women's meeting. At one point, he turned and addressed the crowd gathered in the back. Gentlemen, perhaps you are not aware, that this is a meeting of the Boston Female Anti-Slavery Society, called and intended exclusively for ladies. Understanding this fact, you will not be so rude or indecorous as to thrust your presence upon this meeting. If, gentlemen, any of you are ladies in disguise, why only apprise me of this fact, give me your names, and I will introduce you to the rest of your sex, and you can take seats among them accordingly, he needled. The crowd did not take kindly to Garrison's mocking remarks. He quickly realized that his presence was making things worse, so he tried to escape. The women were determined to continue their meeting and proceeded with the society's business. Soon, Mayor Lyman arrived. He told the women to go home. He feared for their safety and didn't think he could control the growing crowd. Most of the women reluctantly agreed, except for Maria Chapman. She was greatly offended that the mayor could not control the mob. She turned to address him directly.
Ladies, do you wish to see a scene of bloodshed and confusion? If you do not, go home.
Mr. Lyman, your personal friends are the instigators of this mob. Have you ever used your personal influence with them?
I know no personal friends. I'm merely an official. Indeed, ladies, you must retire. It is dangerous to remain.
If this is the last bulwark of freedom, we may as well die here as anywhere.
Thank you. Chapman's words would later become an abolitionist rallying cry. She remained resolute and did not want to give in to this gentleman's mob, but she reluctantly agreed. Chapman helped lead the women down a flight of stairs. The passageway was darkened by the men blocking the windows, but she could see well enough. Maria arranged for the women to march in procession, walking next to their black members to offer a measure of protection and no doubt a show of defiance. 2 and 2 to Hollis Street, each with a colored friend, she said. The sight of the women marching boldly in pairs, black and white, arm in arm, drew hisses from the men in the crowd. They continued their jeering, but parted sufficiently to allow the procession to advance. The original 25 or so women who were upstairs for their meeting swelled in number as other women now joined them. Chapman marched south on Washington Street with her colleagues. She looked outward and was disgusted by what she saw. There were hundreds and hundreds of men arrayed on both sides of the street. These were the wealthy and respectable of Boston, men of influence and standing. Quote, "We saw the faces of those we had, till now, thought friends, men whom we never before met without giving a hand in friendly salutation, men whom till now we should have called upon for condemnation of ruffianism," she said. Back up one, please. Garrison left the meeting by climbing out of the back window, and the crowd gave chase. He fled to a local carpenter shop and tried to hide under a pile of lumber and wood chips in the corner, but was quickly discovered and dragged in front of the old State House. Maria was unaware of this and had already returned to her home on West Street to wait for news. She had a steady stream of visitors to the house that day. Not all were friendly. One group of men warned her husband that they knew the names of his commercial trade partners in the South and were prepared to thwart his business dealings by outing his strident anti-slavery views. At one point, a sheriff's deputy arrived and offered a condescending comment to Maria about his brushes with the mob, as if to emphasize the potential peril he was facing. "I speak as a man just from a mob," he reminded her, but Maria would have none of that. "And I listen as a woman just from a mob," she replied. Her younger sister summed up her diary entry that day, quote, "This is to be remembered as the day 5,000 men mobbed 45 women." So what happens next is really the focus of the book that I've just completed. The day's events had a profound impact on Maria Chapman, and then she went on to a remarkable career as an abolitionist, writer, and social reformer. She died in July of 1885, just shy of her 79th birthday. And as Reverend Cullen talked about earlier, she had her relationship with Reverend Channing, as we might say in modern parlance, it's complicated. Reverend Channing had spoken out against slavery and published this pamphlet you can see on the screen here in 1835, just 2 months after the mob, making a philosophical case against slavery. But he also had criticism for the abolitionists, and Maria never forgave him for that. The church elders have actually decided that they would not allow Maria or any of the women of the Boston Female Anti-Slavery Society to read any announcements at their meeting, but Maria ignored that advice, and one day after her church bingo, she gave her announcement to the sexton, who unwittingly read the notice aloud. Some parishioners were not pleased. One remarked, quote, "Never was such a stir." And as Catherine said, Maria pulled her membership from the Unitarian Church in the 1840s. You can advance one. She wrote this letter that I think was already quoted from, where she said she called Reverend Channing someone who had neither insight, foresight, moral courage, nor firmness. She actually wrote that. If you turn the letter to the side, she wrote that in the margins. And I think it was mentioned earlier, but I think it's worth repeating that the day's events really had a remarkable impact on Maria Chapman for the rest of her life, and her relationship with Reverend Channing was never the same. She wrote this letter she wrote another letter in 1881, so some almost 50 years later after this event, still holding a grudge against Reverend Channing, and offered the following words of wisdom, which I think really resonate even today. I'm going to end my remarks with this quote from Maria Chapman. Quote, "Facts are not always truths, for when they form but part of the truth, they carry the power of a lie." Thank you very much.
So I was so excited when Josh started writing this book. I really had not much knowledge about Maria Chapman, and I think it's a very good example of how even in our progressive Unitarian tradition, the story of the women were often unheard, especially in the case of a pantheon, member of the pantheon like William Ellery Channing. We are members of the Ballou Channing district here in our area, and of course, that district is named for Channing. So William Ellery Channing is one of our, as I say, members of our Unitarian pantheon. So excited to hear about this woman who challenged him and was believed so much in her cause that was willing to go to the extremes that she did. So thanks again, Josh. And as Jim said, there will be a couple of signed copies of Josh's book at the silent auction next Saturday at the fair, but it's also available in local bookstores everywhere. Yeah, it just came out, right? Yes, it did. So thank you very much for sharing the pulpit with me today. My friends, Josh will be available at coffee hour if you have a little more, any questions or anything about her story. Until we meet again, may you be blessed. Now, like Maria Chapman, go be a blessing to the world.